A few months ago, I made a post about the differences between level and environmental design in games, and I realized we never did a formal video on the topic. So, we're rectifying that now, as we're going to talk about the differences between the two and what makes a really solid game when it comes to building amazing level design and a fantastic environment. On the discussion of level versus environmental design, these two terms are often conflated with each other, and it's very easy to explain why. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a major push towards integrating environmental design into a game. And as we talk about level and environmental design, both of them can be seen in essentially the opposite ends of the spectrum. Many early games focus entirely on level design, wherein the environment is simply there to service the mechanics. It has no story connection. It may not even make any sense what is going on in the background. It's just simply there and could be cut and pasted with any number of different tile sets or backgrounds, and there's our game. We can talk about pretty much the slew of 2D platformers, early first-person shooters, strategy games, puzzle games, you name it. These are titles where there's no real desire or any real interest by the design to facilitate or have the environments matter for what's going on. Now, on the flip side of that, games that focus entirely on environmental storytelling are those where there really isn't anything set up to properly test the player or give the player an action or things to do. It's more focused about telling a story around the player. Titles like Gone Home, Dear Esther, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, many other examples. But, as I'm sure every game developer is going to comment down below if I don't say it here, the very best games, and the ones that have stood out the most, have combined environmental and level design into a single element in their games. Major examples, of course, would be all the From Software games, Soulsborne, Sekiro, you name it, as well as titles such as Arcane's Prey, and we can even look at games such as in the open world genre, Horizon Zero Dawn, Breath of the Wild, Far Cry, you name it. And the idea, or what we've really seen as a growing trend, is the idea of how do we merge the mechanics or what we want the player to be doing in the game with creating an environment that makes sense and that adds or grows with that gameplay. It's no longer about just flipping or just switching backgrounds and we're good. It's making that environment make sense within the gameplay. And that, my friends, is very hard to do. And as I said, when we talk about environmental and level design, it's not or it shouldn't be a case of black or white, this or that. You want to be thinking about both, and ultimately, this can lead to much stronger games. And while the consumer may not fully comprehend it, or at least think about while they're playing, it does tend to add a level of flair or quality to these titles. And if you don't believe me, about last year, when we saw kind of more Kaizo games being released, one of the more popular ones was Grand Poo World 2. And in this game, one of the things the developer did was he didn't just create brutally difficult levels, which again, that's kind of the nature of a Kaizo game. He actually created the environment to transition between levels and kind of hint at this overarching story that's going on behind the scenes or kind of guiding the player through it. And again, this kind of stuff is not normally required by a game, but it definitely adds and raises the quality level of it. And my question for you, and we're going to try and answer this one here because I know somebody's going to ask it. Can a game do really well focusing on one or the other? Meaning, can you have a mechanically driven game that has horrible environmental design, just as can you have a very environmentally designed focused game, but very light on level design? And the answer to both those questions is yes. Again, it really depends on the market and kind of what your experience you're aiming for. If you're trying to tell a very emotionally driven story, you're not necessarily thinking about kaizo traps and all matter of death pits around. Just as if you want to focus on just the insane difficulty challenge, then you're not really caring about whether or not your background is a red planet, a blue planet, a hospital, church, whatever. But again, games that have managed to really elevate themselves over the last 10 or so years have managed to do both. And to kind of clarify things for those of you who may still be confused, environmental design is about creating the world for the player to explore. Level design is about creating things for the player to do in that space. And I posted about this on our Discord channel, and Tomo actually brought up a really good point. That when I first thought, or when I was remembering the game What Remains of Edith Finch, I didn't really think about it from a level design standpoint. I saw it just as, again, a pure walking sim. But he was correct when he pointed out that the game does have a flow to it. There is a sense of guiding the player around, telling them or having them figure out where they have to go, what are they doing in each part of the house, and of course solving the few puzzles that are in it. So a game like What Remains of Edith Finch, while it is predominantly focused on the environmental storytelling, it still has elements of level design in it. And again, when you're trying to build games around this, you have to design, or you have to figure out, what are you going to test the player on, and how does the environment fit in there? And we can even look at some of the early examples of games that try to do things as organically as possible, like Half-Life. And Half-Life was probably one of the big watershed moments in terms of integrating environmental storytelling or environmental design into the level design itself. As you remember, the Black Mesa facility was designed to kind of make sense. It was still, a little bit on the gamey side with having to find various switches and open up specific doors. But when you wander around those areas, you found living quarters, you found bathrooms and kitchens, and things that would kind of make sense in a gigantic research facility. And it's these kinds of things, when you think about them, and how this world works around the design, that leads to ultimately stronger games, or games that tend to stick out more. And like we said, with From Software and Soulsborne, that the Dark Souls and the Souls-like level environmental design stands out as some of the more impressive examples, where yes, these levels are designed to challenge and of course kill the player, but they're still there to tell a story, that they mean something to what's going on. You can't just flip areas or flip backgrounds around and the game makes sense. Again, when you look at, what was some of the other examples I was thinking about? I'm trying to remember, there's so many of them. Like, if you're trying to play Dark Souls, you can't just flip, Undead Burg with Blighttown. No, these areas are designed to, again, accompany each other in terms of their design and their environments. And when you start to think about games this way, it really begins to drive this idea home of a complete experience. But it also ends up having another side effect when it comes to designing your levels. And we're going to talk about that next. But first, a quick break. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, link down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. One of the kind of early casualties of the focus on environmental storytelling or environmental design versus level design was the act of having less interesting levels to them. There's, of course, that famous meme chart of early FPS levels versus what became the modern, more event or kind of arena based design. And as we saw developers begin to find their stride with both environmental and level design, it led to this idea of creating, for lack of a better term, denser levels, where a level doesn't have to be a 50 to 100-minute massive chain of corridors and mazes and all that. Instead, you create a very packed and smaller environment that has more areas and things to do in it. And of course, one of the masters of this kind of design would undoubtedly be Arcane Studios. What you're seeing right now is footage of Prey Moon Crash. But Arcane, for pretty much their inception, has been doing a lot in terms of creating these very dense levels and environments, where yes, you are still thinking about what the player is going to be doing at any given point. But all of this fits within the narrative and the environment that is unfolding. And with Talos here, this is the moon base, not the actual Talos base. The area is set up just like in the main game to represent what this moon base would look like. And it's this idea that the environment, if done well enough, is interesting in of itself to create a game around, as opposed again to just focusing entirely on the mechanics. And when we talk about these kinds of games, and again about Arcane, we do have to put in the important caveat that their games are designed around emergent gameplay, wherein it's about the player figuring out how all the rules and mechanics they have access to can be used within the game space. And that is not only another topic in of itself, but it's also something that not every game can necessarily do. But to kind of start to wrap things up, or kind of tie a bow on this discussion, when you are trying to think of good design or good level and environmental design today, it's not about one or the other. You shouldn't be thinking about your environments and your levels as two separate entities. Another brilliant example of this would be, of course, the Ori series, where each environment not only tells a story, but that story becomes a part of the mechanics and the gameplay. When you are in a deep, dark, spider-infested cavern, the mechanic or the chief mechanic for the area becomes staying in the light so you're not killed by, of course, giant spiders who've infested the cavern. When you're in the water area, it becomes about dashing through the water, creating bubbles to kind of carry you around or platform off of, and so on and so forth. Again, the point is that you can't just swap the environments and the game still makes sense. It is about having both of these elements work together. Now, with that said, I do have a question for those of you watching this. What did you think of Control in this regard? As while I really like the environmental design, I don't know if it was really a solid example of good level design, especially if we sit side by side with Prey over here. And as we've said, depending upon your game in question, you can have a focus on one of those points. And you can even see this in games such as the Left 4 Dead series by Valve, that Left 4 Dead focuses a lot on the level design, on picking or figuring out where the blind spots are going to be, what you can do to trap players or sub-special infected attacks. But the game also tells a story about what's going on, that it makes sense in the areas that you're going through. And that, I think, is an important tip to keep in mind, that you want the environment to kind of make sense, or it should be giving the player an idea about what is happening in the game. And can you think of other examples of games that have done environmental and level design justice that again aren't Souls-likes or Arcane Studios? Let me know in the comments below, but once again, thank you for watching this video. Check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.